Welcome to another episode of Hotel Bar Sessions Afterthoughts, where we have a chance to think about things we could have said, we should have said, or in my case, maybe retract a couple of things. And today we're very excited because we are joined by a very special guest. The guest is my brother-in-law, Dave.
Yay!
Hi, everybody. I don't know whether
you may be familiar with Dave from all of us have started doing it, saying when we use a philosophical term or concept, we say, well, let's explain this for my brother-in-law, Dave. And so Dave is with us. And Dave, since you're a guest, we thought we'd give you, even though we don't normally do this, we thought we'd give you a chance to order a drink and rant and or rave about something.
So I have thought about this a great deal with listening to the episodes. And so, but I have to go by my drink of choice, which is gin and tonic, with a good gin, whether it's Hendrix or a Sapphire. I don't care which one of those. Nice. And when you see it get down to the last quarter of it, just bring another. And that is my choice. And I don't like to wave an order, so please just bring another. I do have a rave. I was going to do a rant because, as you're probably going to hear today, I am a bit of a curmudgeon. Now, Rick laughs at that because he knows. But it's a rave because today my wife and I decided to get away for the weekend, and we decided to stay at this great little hotel up in Petoskey, Michigan. And it's one of those hotels that was built in 1899 and has just the character, the quaintness. It's beautiful. There's creaky floors, but it's beautiful woodwork. The lobby area where you can sit and enjoy and talk to somebody and have a drink or have a coffee or whatever. So we're here, and I just want to rave about great old hotels.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
And since you didn't drop the name of the hotel you're staying in, I'm guessing they're not a sponsor of ours.
If they'd like, I could give them a little note saying that. I want to cut, but okay.
Well, as I told you, we'll pay you double what we get paid.
Okay, thank you.
So, these afterthoughts today, we're talking about episodes 88, 89, and 90. So first is episode 88, where we discussed ChatGPT and the panic surrounding it. So Lee, let me start with you so we could ease Dave into this. You have any thoughts about that episode?
I mean, I do have an afterthought about that episode, which is that this had not happened when we recorded, but since then, a number of, let's call them leading tech giants, have signed an open letter that was titled "Pause Giant AI Experiments," an open letter. And they've basically called for a 6-month moratorium on, I think the way they describe it is any AI systems with the capabilities of GPT-4 or greater. So GPT-4 also came out since we recorded this, but it's an interesting letter. I mean, it's scary if you read it, especially given the people who are its co-signatories. But they call for for basically a kind of self-regulating, independent moratorium on these large language model AI systems, or anything kind of black box AI. But they do say that if people don't do this, if tech leaders don't do this, and if they're not transparent about the fact that they're doing it, that they want the government to step in and stop it. So I'm kind of interested to see how this goes. I mean, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I mean, I think, they're asking for, effectively what they say is we should spend these 6 months sitting down and working out ethical principles. Now, I love the fact that they think they can do that in 6 months because it's only taken the rest of humanity 2,000 years to try to work out ethical principles, but whatever, like good on them for trying. But yeah, so that's That's my main sort of afterthought about this.
And I'm pretty sure China and Russia will abide by whatever moratorium we put
And be
down.
100% transparent about self-regulating and transparent.
And I kind of wanted to say, yeah, and every corporate person that is signing that, they're winking at that group over there that I happen to have and I hire an employee, saying, you keep working on it.
Yeah.
So it's not a
Just don't fuck it up for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a moratorium on working on it. It's a moratorium on talking about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Can I follow Dave, or because following from that, and again, this isn't really necessarily about the episode, but I am just amazed at how the panic has not abated,
Not at
but
all. Yeah.
seems to have even increased.
Yeah.
And it really is remarkable.
Well, I'm sorry. It comes into my world. So I own a business, and I own I don't mind saying it. I own an insurance agencies, and we support and deliver products for the end user, for the corporate world down to the end user. And that's scary to me, as you guys were talking about cheating and where the students are getting their information and things like that. For me, it's okay. I've got a customer that pays their premium. I've got a customer then that expects me to give them advice. Well, there are companies out there already using it where, hey, you just log on, you type in what you need, and somebody in quotes responds to your question. That's taking away from me as a business. It's taken away from my employees, and that's scary to me.
Yeah.
Well, especially if they're the somebody, I take it it's a bot with some amount of AI, especially if we can't trust the truth of the information that they're giving.
Right. And so where does it end? And Jason was saying in the episode, he was talking about it was a biography. I think he had a biography done of himself. And all that it got right was the year he was born, or his date of birth, and things like that. But I said, but it's getting better, and at some point it's going to get it right. And so the scary part is these corporations that are going to use this as a business tool, as an advising tool, is okay, if he gets it wrong, and then this person loses money or loses some kind of property or loses whatever, who's liable? It's going to be that company with that AI.
Going to be a lot of bots in jail.
Yeah, right. And who gets in trouble? It's the company ends up, but they're gonna have their offsets, and we know we're gonna lose X number of dollars because this got it wrong, but it's gonna get it right. And then what? And there's a lot of people out there in the service, I kind of call myself in the service industry, in the advisory industry, that looks at it and says, oh boy, this is coming, and I don't know where I go from here.
Well, I think that you're right that, outside of our small world, Rick and I's small world, where everybody's obsessed with cheating, in the larger world, people are worrying about losing their jobs. And that's a completely well-grounded worry. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. But if I could just go back for a second to this thing about what it gets wrong, for two reasons. One, because that is, I think, one of the very first things that was listed in this OpenAI letter about the dangers of the systems is that they can spread misinformation and untruths. And we're going into an election year. And, it matters that, this is happening and that nobody's really keeping tabs on it. But sorry, back to the cheating, but on the same topic, one of my colleagues who is a religious studies professor and works, primarily in, medieval kind of mystic traditions, was saying to us, the members of my department, that she got a few essays that she was pretty sure were written by ChatGPT, and she gave us examples of them. And one of them had a quote by some medieval mystic, female religious writer. which was entirely made up, it turns out.
Nice.
And my colleague said, and nobody had said it in exactly this way, but I think that she really kind of put a fine point on the fear, which is not only about our students getting away with things that we don't want them to get away with or whatever, but she said, I've spent my whole life developing an expertise in this area, and I kind of feel like I'm being gaslighted. Like I'm reading a well-written essay, that has a quote that I think 100% could be real. Like maybe I just missed it somewhere, maybe I can't find it for some reason, but it's just not, it's not real. Yeah.
What's interesting about that is I listened to a podcast called This Week in Google, and one of the hosts of that is a guy named Jeff Jarvis, who was he wrote for TV Guide, and he was a TV critic, and he's now an academic and does some pretty interesting work, especially related to technology and news and journalism. And excuse me, one of the things that he was saying was that what we're beginning to see is that since the ChatGPT is built on large language models and it's our language, why are we suddenly shocked that this thing behaves like we do? Like, it's not as if there isn't a scholar out there who made up a quote and put it in an essay. It's not as if, someone hasn't fabricated something or even plagiarized and so on. And so then we look at ChatGPT and we're like, this is dangerous. Look what's going to happen. And okay, maybe it could happen more quickly and more easily, but I think it's just mimicking us. And I wonder how much of the panic is not that we're looking in a mirror and we're like, oh my God.
Who are you?
How much as academics you are, how much of it is a fear that we're not developing thinkers, though, as you guys, as I have no idea what you people do. I mean, come on, let's be honest. I don't. But
we podcast. That's
yes,
literally
yeah.
the only reason that I have student debt is because I wanted to be a podcaster.
But you're teaching, and correct me if I'm wrong, people to think and bring up your own points and generate something new. Where with this chat, nobody's thinking for themselves, are they? Isn't that a concern at your end that they're really not? And I remember you guys talking about, or Lee, it might have been you, the 80-20, 80% of your students are doing great work, their own work, where 20%, maybe not. Okay, but and I get it. And is that any different from 10 years ago? I don't know. But that was a fear as I was listening to the episode of, are we producing non-thinkers? All we're doing is saying, hey man, write this thing for me, and you look at it and say, yeah, that's pretty well written. Okay, but you didn't write it. Is that a fear for you guys?
Well, I have to say, one of my colleagues, the way he's been discovering that essays were written by ChatGPT is because there are no spelling mistakes.
That's true. I mean, I think that you're bringing up something really important, Dave. And, this is something that I only thought about this actually after we recorded our first episode of next season, which is going to be on The Conversation, the 1974 film, The Conversation. So sorry if this is a little bit, if there's some spoilers involved here, but the movie, The Conversation, is about this conversation that Gene Hackman is recording and trying to sort of figure out what the actual meaning of the conversation is. And it turns out that the truth, if there is one, of what's going on in the conversation depends on this kind of turn of phrase in which if the emphasis were in a different point, it would mean a different thing. So it turns out that the phrase is, he'd kill us if he had the chance, but he later hears it as, he'd kill us if he had the chance. And those are two very different things, right? And so I think one of the things that I try to communicate to my students is that I don't believe, I'm quite confident that ChatGPT doesn't quote unquote understand human language, right? Because it, for example, couldn't understand the difference between he'd kill us if he had the chance and he'd kill us if he had the chance. ChatGPT absolutely couldn't understand that. That requires not only some agility and familiarity with natural human language, but also some critical thinking, right? And some kind of cultural like understanding, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that it understands. My worry is that, exactly as you're saying, that if we don't sort of put the emphasis on the critical thinking skills, then students are not going to catch when ChatGPT gets it wrong, because they're just going to assume that anything ChatGPT says is true, and like replace students with like all the humans. It doesn't have to just be students. And that's one of my worries. And I'm not sure that, this technology wasn't released too fast, right? And with definitely not enough explanation. And on that point, sorry to keep prattling on here, but on that point, one thing that has occurred to me after we recorded this ChatGPT episode was that I've noticed that since it's, kind of overtaken the news, stories about ChatGPT have kind of overtaken the news, that a lot of people are making this mistake of conflating ChatGPT and AI in general. Like that what ChatGPT is AI, and ChatGPT is just one particular form of AI. It's a large language model, but Larry Summers, I mean, it's not like we're friends, but former Harvard president and economist Larry Summers tweeted out a couple of days ago that, ChatGPT is going to replace doctors and ChatGPT is going to replace nurses. And I'm like, a large language model is not going to be able to insert an IV, period. Right. Like that is not going to happen. I mean, obviously there are many AI systems that are replacing some of the work of medical professionals, but like, this is not it,
And I know we have to wrap up, but one of the things that occurred to me and after listening to the episode again was that I forget who said it. Lee, you might know. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to your original point, Dave, I think, in that I think that AI and then eventually robotics, they always have the promise of freeing us from work. But my question always is, how is that going to be distributed? And it's not going to be evenly distributed. And so some people will be freed from work and, oh my God, what a surprise. It's the rich people who are freed from work. Meanwhile, everyone else still has to go into the coal mines and into the factories. And I worry the same thing about ChatGPT. There's an economic issue.
Before we move on, I have a question for Dave, though. So, Dave, like, I'm curious, do you feel like you understood ChatGPT better after this conversation, or is it still kind of like a magical mystery?
Well, let's be honest about any of your podcasts, that it's a struggle for me. Let's be honest. No, it was a little difficult understanding it. You guys were getting into things that I just was like, wow, what? I'm sorry, what? And so it was difficult. I did listen to it again, and it was nice to have my wife listening to it also, just because I'm like, okay, wait, was it this? Was it that? And so it is, for me, it's out there because I know about it from the business world a little bit. But from the business world, it says, this is coming and you better be ready. And that's, it's not a, you better be ready. And because this is a great thing that is going to make your life a lot easier. It's, this is coming and this could be a problem. Yeah. And so that's where I got it. But you guys, in terms of in the academic and talking about that and the technical part of it went above my head, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I think the AI leaders are going to be taking 6 months to figure out how to make all this clear and ethical. So
wait, I don't know if
we only had an hour. So
I'm not good at winking, but I'm winking right now.
Yeah.
All right. So then episode 89 was on late capitalism. And Dave, I'm going to go to you first. Do you have any thoughts after listening to that episode?
So that episode, and I get this with some of the episodes, all not all your podcasts, but some of the podcasts for you guys, and as a person in the business world, I I start getting a little frustrated with you because and I'm including everybody here, all of you. It's because, okay, what's next? If
Mhm.
and I got the impression, okay, capitalism is bad. Give me a solution. By the way, I'm not a Bernie Sanders guy. Socialism doesn't work. And by the way, communist, that doesn't work, at least in my opinion. Okay, capitalism, yeah, there are things that need to be changed. And I 100% agree. I can go back and tell you about who I am, and liberal, conservative, and who I am. But I get the opinion when I was in there, it was like, okay, capitalism bad. What do you, and that's it. But what's the solution? And so I look to you, the academics, fix it. So go. You got 30 seconds to completely
With
fix
all of
everything.
our power.
Right, exactly. So that's where, in that episode,
Yeah.
I don't want to be negative. Oh, yeah, I do. Again, I said I was a curmudgeon. I am a curmudgeon. Okay, if it's bad, fix it. And what's your solution? Just don't say it's bad.
Okay, so I'm so glad we have you for this, because I'm so glad we have you for this conversation, because I think this is probably what a lot of people in the business sector and just a lot of people living in America today think. And I suppose, like, my first question for you would be, like, why not? I mean, why can't you point out that something is bad without already having a solution? I mean, that, like, it seems to me, I mean, just to over dramatize this point, right? Like, if this was 200 years ago, and, I'm talking to a plantation owner, and I'm like, this is a terrible system, right? What is he going to say? Well, what else are we going to do? We get, like, I'm going to have to close my business if we pay all the laborers,
Right,
et cetera,
right,
et cetera.
right.
And, I mean, obviously the fact that not everybody can imagine the next step is no reason not to say, we got to figure out another step, because this is broken. It's not working. A lot of people are suffering, et cetera. So that's my first question. Well, my second question, and this is a little bit of a, like, rhetorical question, but how do you know that socialism and communism don't work? We haven't seen them. I mean, like, when we point to whatever, the former USSR or North Korea or China or Cuba, like, none of those are actually socialist countries or communist countries. They're, I mean, and now currently all of them are capitalist countries. They're just also dictatorships, so I'm not sure that just because, I mean, we all know that just because a country calls itself a communist country doesn't mean it is a communist country, as much as if a country calls itself a democracy doesn't mean it is a democracy, right? So those are my two questions for you.
And that's fair, and you're going to have to repeat some of them because I, memory.
Okay.
But going back, and I appreciate that. I'm somebody that can say, listen, I'm the first person to say, oh, you're wrong. How dare you? But then you say, okay, well, what's wrong with asking the question? And then I think, well, yeah, you're right. Nothing wrong with asking the question. But that's where my mind goes of ask the question, but then, okay, who's got the answer? And I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
I look around our leaders, and I don't think any of them. I think there is one person that was more socialism, and it was interesting. The Elizabeth Warren comment of, nope, she's a capitalist because she keeps saying she is.
Right.
But I think, and I will credit Kelly, my wife, with this, is, boy, she's smart. And if we could get and listen to her and just not think, well, yep, she is so far left, and so everybody in the middle and or to the right will not listen to her at all. And that's where I, as a person, where I lean, I'm in the middle. Okay, I'll listen.
Wait,
to
is
her.
there a lean in the middle? I thought the middle was enough. I'm leaning to the middle.
Yeah, and so I appreciate. I liked it. I what you just said there was okay. What's wrong with me saying this is broken? Well, yeah, good point. All right.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
okay. I don't like you saying to me that that's right, because now I'm wrong and I don't like you, Lee. So we're done. No, it's a good question. So then what was the other? I'm sorry. I don't know if you have another
So
question.
yeah, no, that's a really good answer. The second question was just, to the extent that people have offered what we might loosely call socialist corrections to the current capitalist system. You say socialism doesn't work, but I mean, we could point to a lot of things in our country right now that are socialist elements of our, capitalist democracy, that Social Security, fire departments, police departments, whatever, and say, well, these obviously do make things better. So, maybe let's tweak a few other things. Maybe let's go universal healthcare. Maybe let's go, whatever to fix the things that are wrong.
Yeah.
So my question was like, how do you know that socialism doesn't work?
And it's a very good question. And then I kind of turn around and sheepishly kind of shrug my shoulders and say, you're right. I don't. and that's the way I was brought up, and you learned, and it's social and without going further into it. But yeah, Rick,
but that's the point I was going to make, is that one of the luxuries that people like Lee and I have, and I'll be frank, I have more of this luxury than Lee has because of teaching loads situation. But one of the luxuries we have is that we are not working in the day-to-day of a structure and a system, so that we can step back and say, wait, how is this actually working? And let's figure out what the pieces are and what's the relationship among the pieces. When I was 15 and working in Baskin Robbins, I was not really able to understand that the owner of that franchise that I worked in was reaping money off of my labor, more money off of my labor than he was returning to me in the form of a wage. And so the part of being an academic is we have the luxury of being able to look at a system or a structure that is incredibly complicated and try to figure out how it's working. And then we say, here, this is the way we think this is working. And I don't think you would sign on to this if someone asked you ahead of time. And so I think our job, a fancy way of saying that, is a huge part of our job is critical. And then you asked originally about, okay, so then what's the solution? Then I wonder, are we the best people to be providing the solution? Because if we can show that this system has problems and it may be unethical, or we wouldn't all want it, then isn't this the creation of a solution the problem for all of us? And that we as academics might have to step aside a little bit and say, look, let's all try to construct this future now that we understand what some of the problems are.
See, and that's a good point of where, okay, yeah, I say you're bad idea. And then you say, well, what's wrong with this? And then what's wrong with handing it off? It's done everywhere. Any part of society. Listen, I can't figure this one out. You figure it out.
Yeah.
There's a problem. Here's the problem. Figure it out. That's a good point.
My worry is that we don't want to figure it out until there's a unavoidable crisis, an existential crisis. I mean, you're a business owner, so we could not have gotten through COVID without mass socialist measures, right? Anytime there's a fire or a flood or a tornado or a hurricane, we unleash the socialist gates, right?
Right.
And everybody understands, because there's a crisis, like we can't operate business as usual. But I think maybe the problem that people don't see is all the other times when there's not a pandemic or a fire or a flood or a tornado or a hurricane, that it's not working then either.
Right.
And we could open up those gates of help a little bit, right? And at least make things not as awful as they are for so many people.
I will give you a quick 100% other side of that. And
Yeah,
this is a friend of, I consider him a friend. He is so far right of the right that he had gone to he lives in Michigan, and he had gone to the city
Wait,
council.
there are right wingers living in Michigan?
I don't
Who
know
knew?
if you get outside of the academic world, but the Trump flags fly everywhere. But
don't we call those what is it, well-formed militias?
right, exactly. Don't mess with the Michigan
well organized
militia.
militias.
But as you talked about fire departments, and it just clicked into my head. He said this years ago. He goes, why are we funding fire departments? Stop funding fire departments. And if a house burns down, okay, well, they have insurance. And then that's, me as the business person, is no, we just stop funding it. And then maybe something else could fund or this. And he's like, no.
Insurance is a socialist measure.
Absolutely.
Everybody puts it.
Right.
Absolutely it is. And so, and when I say socialism bad, I also understand. Oh, and by the way, Rick's where he is going to move to, I'm positive here in the next couple of weeks, when Florida says we are not going to, we don't take money from anybody, and we're not taking a dime, and a hurricane comes through, and well, if you really want to give us some money, that's fantastic. And what's her face out in Arkansas now, and tornadoes roll through it, Huckabee, and you're like, tornadoes roll through, and you're like, well, yeah, these people need money, and we don't, as Arkansas, we don't have it. Oh, wait a second. And so I get it too. I get it.
Yeah. No, I think that, first of all, I should have started by saying, I don't think any of us really has the answer of how to get from the shitstorm that we're in to something better right now. But I completely agree with you that, at least historically speaking, many of the incidences of a transition from something like we are in now to a socialist or communist state have not worked, have proven to be terrible solutions. And so can't be those solutions. We don't want a dictatorship or an authoritarian sort of government, but yeah, we all can. The thing is that the crises are coming hard and fast at us now. And, we can't wait until the really big one comes, and the really big one might be AI. Who knows? What's going to happen? What's going to happen in 10 years when 8 million people are out of work?
Well, at least global warming is a fake, false narrative. So, and we don't need, as a world, we don't need to do anything about that. So, okay.
until we have 1 billion climate refugees in Michigan.
And then Boca Raton, Florida, they, hey, we're flooded out. What are we going to do about this?
Right.
Well,
flooded
out now.
I don't know if Rick has mentioned this before, but climate disaster actually is his solution to Florida. It's just gonna disappear.
Okay. All right.
And the coastal elites, they'll all be gone.
Can I just say though that Lee, the point you just made was one of the things that occurred to me in listening back to it again, in that the very notion that we refer to late capitalism rather than capitalism, at first I and you could hear this a little bit in the episode.
Rick, can I interrupt real quick? Yeah. Can you tell me, and this was Jason's, I believe, but I'm not sure the late capitalism versus capitalism. What?
I'm with you on that, Dave.
Thank you, Lee.
Well, so there is a definition he raised, and I think that gets a little bit too complicated. I have maybe too simplistic of a way of talking about it, and that is that there does seem to be really important differences between an economy that's based on people going into the mines or making widgets, or so industrial factory kind of economy and production, where Marx's analysis is really about commodities, like making goods, making things, and how those things have value, and labor is what gives those things value. And it seems like it's important to say, well, wait a second, what about an economy that is based primarily not on producing things, or producing, incredibly abstract things, like podcasts, for example, or, um,
Or where money makes money, where no labor is finance capital, where
yeah,
no labor is required at all.
put your money to work for you. So
Yeah.
then money is the labor that makes more money. And so there are important shifts there that I think, to use a different label like late capitalism, to talk about the ways in which still some of the fundamentals of capitalism maintain themselves while capitalism is shifting to adapt to new situations. And this is something I wish I had said in the episode, but I think this shows that capitalism as an economic model is incredibly wily, and it is adaptable and changeable. And I think that's I've now come more to the point of saying, okay, maybe it is important to talk about late capitalism. But then when you see how much capitalism changes over time, I don't think that we should then be shocked if we when we ask, okay, but what would be the change required in order to get out of capitalism? Right? I mean, we're within a model that is constantly changing, and so the change can't be our problem, I think.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
let's talk about the allegory of the cave. I've been excited about revisiting this, and I was really super excited, Dave, when I heard that you were going to be joining us for this, because this episode is something that we're going to take up as a series over the, in future seasons, where we thought, there's a lot of things in philosophy that we think like most people are kind of noddingly familiar with. Like, people know the allegory of the cave, but maybe they haven't read it, or maybe they haven't, maybe not know all the details. So we decided to start with the allegory of the cave. So I kind of like to start with you first, Dave. I mean, were you familiar with the allegory of the cave prior to this? And
well, as you said, some people are. I just want to say, you want to bet? Because no, and again, I'm going to bring in. Well, this time I'll bring in Rick's sister on this one, who I happen to be married to. I'm like, I looked at her and I said, "So, do you know this?" And she goes, "My philosophy was talking to Rick on the phone during school and making him write my papers," kind of thing. And so no, I didn't. And so let me back up and say to Rick how much I appreciated when you explained and you went through the 10,000, what I call the 10,000 foot version of it, and said, "Here it is in a nutshell." And I'm like, okay, I got it. And then as you were going through it helped me with that. So I enjoyed that one. It was almost more, well, you tell me, it was more of a class for me as a philosophy 101, I assume, kind of situation, where I kind of like, okay, you started there, I understand what you're saying, and then you went in, and I appreciated that, and I enjoyed it.
Have you seen The Matrix, or had you seen
I
The
did.
Matrix?
I have, and
So you saw the connections there.
I'm again, I'm not smart enough. I said, okay, wait a second, and the allegory of the cave, I'm like, what in the world? But then I was reading the notes on it, I'm like, The Matrix. I got it, and I was reading. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that episode because I was learning more that way. Maybe because it was, again, philosophy 101.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Dave, that, from the moment I introduced you as a character in the podcast, to get us to slow down and explain things, I think all three of us, the usual hosts of the podcast, have someone in mind who might be listening, and we want to make sure that they're still with us. And so that's been really helpful to us, I think. And in That's not easy to say.
Hmm.
In an episode, um, like a discussion of the allegory of the cave, um, it was for me a lot of fun because it was a chance to, in a sense, present what this thing is and what its importance might be, and then with my friends, the co-hosts, to like get into the weeds a little bit, and so that back and forth was really enjoyable for me.
I that was going to be a question. I'm glad you said that. And Lee, I'm looking to you, and I don't know if you and Jason, you guys have talked about it. Do you enjoy going back to that elementary kind of philosophy and talking about it again? Because I assume you teach it, you've gone over it again and again and again, and you've had however many students write papers and you have them do it. Is it like, oh my God, how the hell are we bringing this up? But I ask you, did you enjoy doing that then?
I really did, Dave. And unlike my co-hosts, I do teach a lot of intro level classes. I think that that's probably, that's probably what pays most of my bills in our department, is that I'm pretty good at getting people excited about philosophy who haven't done it before.
Yeah.
And so I'm teaching these things several times a semester. I think that, one of the things about philosophical conversations in general, but in particular texts like this allegory, is that people think that you teach it and you just have this exact same class every time you teach it. But you can obviously, when you're talking about a story like this, I mean, people are going to have wildly different ideas about what's important, about what they would or wouldn't do, about what they understand or don't understand about. And it's almost never the case that, at least once in a semester, somebody doesn't bring something up that I've been teaching for 15 years that I hadn't really thought about before. I mean, even in that conversation, it had never really occurred to me before to wonder why the person who goes back down in the cave doesn't go and talk to the puppet masters instead of the prisoners. And it was only just in the course of having that conversation that it occurred to me. And I thought, yeah, like, how many years have I been reading this? And like, that seems like an obvious question. Yeah.
And
I really did enjoy the conversation.
I was interested to hear also, you said, Lee, that you teach it in different classes, and I forget what those were, but I'm like, but you said that the title of the class, but I'm like, oh, all right. As I have learned that, because that was late in the episode. Yeah. I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. You would kind of bring that up teach that way. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well,
I mean, I think recently I've been teaching it in my philosophy and technology class. And part of that is because I do think that now when we talk about things like, I mean, video games or virtual reality or any of those sorts of things, that our experience of those is different than our experience of, for example, being in a movie theater. Right. Where, I mean, everybody can kind of see the obvious parallels between, being in the cave and looking at shadows on the wall and it seeming real, and being in a movie theater and looking at, at a screen and it seeming real, but our experience with virtual reality is different. I mean, it's almost as if we're in the world of the screen, and we're not just looking at a screen. So it is interesting to think about. I mean, I personally think that this may be truer to the actual experiences of the people in Plato's cave, that it's not, they don't have the experience of looking at a screen. Right. They have the experience of being in a world that is real.
Right. Yeah. And related to that, and also related to the question you just asked, Lee, what I appreciated in talking with Jason and Lee, but particularly Lee contributed this to the conversation, is I have to be honest, I never quite had a good account of why it is that the sun that functions as like lighting things up, right? So you could see the reality, why that is then called by Plato in the story good. Or the good. And so like I've never really had a solid account of why is this story about what is real and therefore what knowledge is. Why is this related to the good? And Lee, I think, really opened my eyes to two aspects of that. One is, and this has come up on several episodes of the podcast, is the truth itself a good, right? Is the truth itself valuable?
Okay.
And then secondly, what would it mean to say that our world is actually made up of various variations, that's to say the same thing twice, variations of different expressions of what is good. And so reality in a certain way could be constituted by goodness or the good itself. And so I really appreciated Lee helping me come to understand what the function of the good there is in this story, because frankly, when I teach it, I sort of rush over that and don't look over here. Hey, here's a shiny object.
This came up for me, and I don't know if this is where you wanted to go with me, but this came up with me. I wondered, just getting with Plato in general, are you two like, oh, I'm so sick of Plato? Yes, I understand everybody knows him, but I'm so sick of him. Is there any part of that? Lee, obviously you teach still that, and and so are you sick of that?
Okay, so a couple of things. Like, I really hate to read Plato. I love to teach Plato. I love the ideas behind Plato, but I really hate to read Plato. Part of that is just because he writes in this dialogue form. Part of it is because it's not even a good dialogue. It's just like Socrates and a bunch of patsies. So it sort of is frustrating to me. But I will say that I do think that I don't love Plato as much as many of my friends and colleagues do. And part of that is because I do feel like when I'm reading and teaching Plato that I'm really teaching literature and not philosophy. And I think I could teach the Bible, or I could teach War and Peace, or I could teach, there are lots of things that I could teach that are literature, and we can find good, important, perennial philosophical questions in there, and probably could also find arguments in there, but that it's different than teaching, I don't even more traditional philosophical texts. I don't know. I just yeah. So I do get tired of teaching. I don't get tired of talking about Plato, but I do get tired of teaching Plato.
Okay.
What about you, Rick?
Well, I was going to say that Lee and also Jason to a large extent, and we were all trained in a certain kind of philosophy that thinks that the texts of our tradition, so even before Plato, going back to Thales, and all of these are still important, relevant philosophical contributions. And so our approach to philosophy is always, at least has one foot engaged with these texts of the past. I agree with Lee that these are plays, basically, what Plato wrote. They're plays, and they have characters. And yes, Lee's right that most of what the other characters besides Socrates, well, there's one exception, but most of what the other characters say is, yes, my God, you're right, Socrates. And oh, indeed, it must be the case.
You are fantastic.
But what people
killing it, Socrates, killing it.
Right. What people who spend their lives reading these texts have shown me is that there are often philosophically important things that happen that are related to the arguments that are made. And so often these plays are set in a certain location, and that location is important. Who the characters are is sometimes important. One of my favorite dialogues is one called Phaedo. Most of these are named after the main character that Socrates is talking to. And so one of mine is called Phaedo. And there, it begins with this guy Phaedo talking to this other guy, Echecrates, about the events that happened on Socrates' last day. And so then Phaedo then just starts telling the story. But then exactly mathematically in the middle, this guy who's listening to the story now interrupts and says, "Oh my God, what the hell? That was incredible. What did you do?" And then the dialogue makes a shift. And so like I'll name that some of them. Michael Noss, for example, has, and Dave, you've met Michael.
Yes.
He reads Plato a lot and very carefully, and he's taught me that there is something to think about in this form. But in a way, I'm with Lee. Like, that's not one of my powers. You know,
Okay.
to read literature is not one of my powers, and so, you know, in that sense, I think you don't want to hear what I want to say about Plato, because I don't have the power that it takes to teach Plato.
Okay.
That being said, I always teach Plato in my intro classes.
I mean, all due respect to Michael Noss, and I am not a Plato scholar, but when I hear things like that, like, oh, and it was exactly in the middle that this thing happened, and, you know, it seems to me a little bit like people who are like, if you play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and watch The Wizard of Oz at the same time, like, you know what I'm saying?
Which I'm not sure Michael wouldn't say that as well. Lee, did you have any thoughts about the allegory?
I mean, no more than I've already said. I do think that I am very glad that we're doing this. I think it's something that is, like, I was a little bit worried that it was going to be just a kind of rehearsal of, you know, the sort of standard readings of the allegory of the cave. And so I was really glad that we, you know, that it was illuminative to me and generative for me in a lot of ways. And I'm glad to hear Dave say that it was helpful for people who aren't familiar with the allegory of the cave. I feel like you know, like, I kind of want to call this series going forward a sort of like cocktail conversation series. It's like, you know, like, you know, maybe, you know, even if you haven't read it, like, you'll at least know enough about it that you could bring it up at a cocktail conversation now.
Right. So arming people to have a cocktail conversation.
Yeah, right.
Because Lee, we are always having cocktail conversations in the hotel bar.
Yeah. But Dave, I do want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to bring up, and I don't know how we got there or how you got there during the episode, but there was a question of funding and how do you fund innovation? And I could be wrong with that. I apologize. And there was the question of that, and Lee. So I was here we go. I'm going to kind of throw you out here. Is there was a question of, well, we as a society should fund that for this person, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of understand that, but I was looking to get a little bit more from you, because I about, you know, lit my car and almost ran it into a tree, saying, oh, she is so effing wrong. I am not going to fund this guy. And you know what? This guy, this person, this male, this woman, this group, you have this idea, run with it, find your own funding. You know, this is where I think, okay, you need some blood, sweat, and tears in here, and you need to work, versus, hey, yeah, just give me the money for that and we'll see if it works. Can you kind of enlighten me with what your thought process was there?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say I'm frequently very wrong. So this is like, do not feel bad. I mean, I jokingly say I'm very rarely wrong, but I am frequently very, very, very wrong. Okay, so if I'm being 100% honest, I'm not sure of the context of this comment. So let me try to float this by you. Like, I do remember at one point in the late capitalism episode saying that, in my view, and I think also in Marx's view, that the function of capitalism is not to motivate into innovation or to, you know, encourage entrepreneurship or any of those things. That the only function of capitalism as a system is to produce what you and I would call profit, what he calls surplus value. And I do think that that's true. I think that, that often that system of capitalism is justified on the basis of these kind of moral grounds, that it causes people to be innovative. It causes people to be, or encourages people to be entrepreneurial, or encourages people to be competitive, which encourages them to be innovative and entrepreneurial. And I don't think that that's actually true. And for many reasons, because of what you just said, which is that what capitalism does is it sets up a system that if you have an idea, or if you have some kind of innovative or entrepreneurial idea, you've still got to go out there and, I don't know what you said, like put the blood and sweat and tears into getting it funded, getting it on the ground, getting it on the market, and hopefully eventually making it profitable. So I'm not sure if that was the comment, but I don't disagree with you in this, economy that, yeah, if you have an idea, you have to get it funded. And I don't know that I would say you ought to, but I would say you have to.
And to follow up on that this goes back to my comment about the relationship between knowledge and the good. There is an awful lot of innovation that capitalism produces and maybe requires, but it's all innovation in making profit, right? And so there is absolutely no reason why capitalism should it does encourage solutions to global climate change, curing diseases, better firefighting prevention, cures to homelessness. So there is no notion of the good or goods that belongs to capitalism except how to generate more profit. And that's where all the innovation is directed. And so if I want to be someone who might think, it really sucks that there are about 100 people living in tents in the park at the end of my block. I got a couple of ideas about what we can do about this, but I need some money. Capitalism is not going to produce that for me. Capitalism is not going to fund that for me.
No, you're right. And I guess I think the bigger picture, and when somebody can make a buck off it, I truly agree with that. Global warming or whatever it is, when somebody comes up with an idea, if we do this, listen, I've got this product, I've got this, and this is going to help with that, and it's going to end this. Okay. And if somebody says, yeah, we have to have that, okay, somebody's going to make a lot of money off it. And that's what I call capitalism. I came up with this idea. We all need it. I can sell it. I'm happy with the money.
But don't you think that often because the profitable idea always wins out over the good idea, the better idea, right? That what happens is that, for years and years and years, we had profitable ideas that basically created the climate crisis that we're in right now. And it's very difficult to find people to fund the good ideas that might ameliorate some of the problems of the climate crisis, because the old ideas are still profitable, like, coal burning, technologies or gas burning cars, they're still really profitable.
And that's where I, as a person in the middle of the corporate world of the political world, I'm somebody that says, okay, no, you got to end that. What do you mean you're still burning coal? I get that it costs money to not burn coal, but holy shit, are you kidding me that we're still looking at that? And it's because there are a lot of people that have jobs that do that. And I get, we need to figure it out. And that's where I look at the two of you, and Jason, if he's going to listen to this, he better hear me, is that I look at you, the people that are supposed to have the ideas, and you figure it out, because I can't.
Well, on that note, it looks like me and Jason and Rick have some work to do in the coming season.
Right.
Dave, it's been so great having you here with us. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your vacation, especially to talk with us. This has been like a treat. And thank you for
and me
your
too.
support on Patreon.
I really enjoy it. I do. I enjoy listening to you guys. I do have fun listening, and I do. Again, I just appreciate you guys.
I have to admit, Dave, that when you started asking this question about how do things get funded, I thought you were sneaking in a subtle Patreon plug.
But since he didn't,
yeah.
Rick.
By the way, insert here a little commercial. Maybe you should send a couple bucks to this podcast, kind of thing.
Well, we
Yeah.
appreciate your support for sure, Dave. And
Well,
that goes for all of our Patreon supporters who can find us at patreon.com/hotel bar sessions. But Dave, I agree with Lee. This has been a lot of fun having you on. Yeah, I think having a perspective like yours is really important for us as co-hosts and for the podcast in general.
Well, I appreciate it. And if we're doing this, can I just get a cab? I'm getting so tired of Uber and Lyft. I just want to be able to hail down a cab and
Yeah.
be done with it. So let's do that.
We'll get you a cab. But Dave, you might be interested to know, and Lee mentioned this, that although, currently we're on breaks between seasons, we're already working on season 7, and we have a lot of really exciting topics that we're discussing. And I think Lee mentioned already, so I'll just say it again, that we're going, Hotel Bar Sessions goes back to the movies in episode 1. And this season we watched the movie The Conversation, and I had never seen it before, and I have not. Watching the movie was a fantastic experience, and then talking with Lee and Jason about it was. But we have a lot of good guests lined up, a lot of good topics, and we're really excited to start season 7.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Okay,
Your cab's here.